The distress signal had been broadcasting for 17 days when the human ship Mercy's Call finally detected it. Captain Thomas Reyes stood on the bridge, his weathered face illuminated by the faint blue glow of the holographic display. The signal was weak, barely a whisper against the cosmic background noise, but it was unmistakably a cry for help. "Can you clean that up?" he asked his communications officer. Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka's fingers danced across her console. The static cleared slightly, and a voice emerged. It was thin and high-pitched, speaking in a language the translation software struggled to process. But certain words came through clearly enough. "Children. Dying. Please." Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. He had been running supply routes along the outer rim for 15 years. He had seen plenty of hardship, plenty of suffering, but something about that voice, that desperate plea, cut through him like nothing else. "Set a course," he said quietly. "Maximum speed." The Mercy's Call was not a military vessel. It was a converted cargo hauler, retrofitted with medical bays and emergency supplies. The Humanitarian Aid Corps had purchased it cheap from a mining company that had gone bankrupt. Its crew of 47 volunteers came from all walks of life. Teachers, doctors, engineers, farmers. People who had chosen to spend their lives helping others instead of chasing wealth or glory. 3 days later, they dropped out of faster-than-light travel near a planet called Ashara 7. What they found made even the most experienced crew members fall silent. The planet had once been home to a thriving colony of the Kirith, an insectoid species known throughout the galaxy for their intricate hive structures and their deep devotion to community. The Kirith had settled Ashara 7 2 centuries ago, building a civilization of remarkable beauty. Their cities were works of art, towers of crystallized resin that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. Now those towers lay in ruins. Great swaths of the planet's surface were scorched black. The atmosphere was choked with ash and toxic particles from some catastrophic event. "What happened here?" whispered Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's chief medical officer. The sensors told a grim story. A rogue asteroid had struck the planet 8 months ago. The impact had triggered volcanic eruptions across 3 continents. The Kirith had sent out calls for evacuation, but help had come too slowly. By the time rescue ships arrived, most of the population had perished. The survivors had been evacuated to other Kirith worlds. But someone had been left behind. Thomas guided the ship through the debris field that now orbited the planet, searching for the source of the distress signal. They found it near the equator, in a valley that had been partially sheltered from the worst of the devastation. A single structure still stood, a dome of hardened resin that glowed faintly with emergency lighting. "I'm reading life signs," announced the sensor operator, her voice trembling slightly. "Multiple signatures. They're small. Very small." The landing party consisted of Thomas, Elena, and 6 volunteers equipped with breathing apparatus and protective suits. They touched down 100 meters from the dome and approached on foot. The ground crunched beneath their boots, covered in a layer of ash several inches thick. The dome's entrance was sealed, but it responded to their presence. A section of the wall became transparent, revealing a figure standing on the other side. It was a Kirith, but smaller than any Thomas had ever seen. Barely 3 feet tall, with delicate wings folded against its back and large compound eyes that reflected the dim light. The young Kirith pressed one of its 4 hands against the barrier. Its mouth parts moved, producing sounds that the translator rendered as words. "You came. You actually came." Thomas knelt down to bring himself closer to the creature's eye level. "We heard your signal. How many of you are there?" 43. "We are the last." Elena was already scanning with her medical equipment. Her face grew pale as she processed the readings. "Captain, these are all juveniles. The oldest can't be more than a few cycles old. And their vitals?" She shook her head. "They're starving, dehydrating. Some of them won't last another week." The young Kirith who had greeted them was named Chira. She was the eldest of the survivors, and she had been the one to figure out how to operate the emergency beacon. She had taught herself from damaged instruction manuals while caring for the younger ones. Her story came out in fragments as they worked to establish a safe entry into the dome. When the asteroid struck, the adults had rushed the children to this shelter. It was designed as a nursery built to protect the young during natural disasters. The adults had promised to return for them once the evacuation ships arrived. They never came back. For 8 months, Chira and the older juveniles had kept the younger ones alive. They had rationed the emergency food supplies. They had recycled water. They had sung the traditional songs to keep spirits up during the long, dark nights when the ground shook and the sky burned. But the food had run out weeks ago. The water recycler was failing. And one by one, the youngest had begun to fade. "We sent signals every day," Chira said as she led them inside. "Every day. Nobody answered. We thought everyone had forgotten us." The interior of the dome was heartbreaking. Kirith children of various sizes huddled in small groups, their exoskeletons dull from malnutrition. Some were too weak to move. They watched the humans enter with expressions that might have been fear, might have been hope. Elena immediately began triage while Thomas coordinated with the ship. Within an hour, they had established a supply line. Nutrient solutions compatible with Kirith biology were shuttled down. Emergency heating units were set up to combat the cold that had seeped in as the dome's power systems failed. The crew of the Mercy's Call worked through the night. They carried the weakest children aboard the ship, where the medical bay had been hastily reconfigured for Kirith patients. They set up feeding stations and purified water distribution points. Thomas found himself sitting with a group of small Kirith who were too frightened to eat. He remembered a trick his grandmother had used when he was a child, afraid and refusing dinner. He began to tell them a story. It was a simple tale about a brave little creature who crossed a vast ocean to find its family. The translator rendered his words into the Kirith language, and slowly the children began to eat. By morning, the situation had stabilized. The critical cases were out of immediate danger. The dome was warm again, its systems restored with spare parts from the ship. But a new problem had emerged. The Kirith homeworld had been contacted. The response was not what Thomas had hoped for. The message was polite but firm. The Kirith government expressed gratitude for the human intervention. However, they could not accept the children. Resources were stretched thin from absorbing the other Ashara 7 refugees. There was simply no capacity to care for 43 orphans with no family connections, no hive affiliation, no one to claim them. Chira stood beside Thomas as he read the message. Her antennae drooped. "They do not want us," she said quietly. "We are without hive. We are nothing." Thomas looked at her, then at the children who had begun to emerge from the dome, blinking in the pale light of Ashara 7's sun. Some of them were playing, their natural resilience already asserting itself. Others stood close to the human volunteers, small hands reaching up to grip larger ones. "No," Thomas said firmly. "You are not nothing. You are children, and children deserve to be protected." He activated his communicator and connected to the ship. "Yuki, get me a channel to Earth, direct to the Humanitarian Aid Corps' headquarters. I need to speak with Director Morrison." What followed would change the course of human history in ways no one could have predicted. Director Catherine Morrison was a woman who had seen much in her 70 years of life. She had survived the resource wars. She had helped rebuild cities devastated by climate disasters. She had overseen relief efforts on a dozen worlds. But when she received Thomas's transmission, complete with images of the Ashborn children, she felt something she had not felt in a long time: fury and determination. Within 48 hours, she had mobilized every resource at her disposal. Ships were redirected. Supplies were gathered. A call went out across human space, asking for volunteers willing to help care for the orphan colony. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people answered. Families offered to foster Kirith children. Teachers volunteered to learn their language and culture. Medical teams specialized in xenobiology prepared to relocate to wherever they were needed. But where would that be? The Kirith would not take the children. Other species in the galactic community offered sympathy, but little practical assistance. It seemed impossible. Then a small colony on the planet Harmony 3 made an offer. They had been established only a decade ago, a mixed community of humans from different nations who had come together to build something new. They had room, they had resources, and they had open hearts. "We'll take them all," said the colony's leader, a former schoolteacher named Marcus Webb. "Every single one. They will be our children too." The journey from Ashar 7 to Harmony 3 took 3 weeks. The Mercy's Call was joined by 4 other human vessels, forming a small convoy. The children were distributed among the ships, each group accompanied by human volunteers who worked to earn their trust. Chira stayed close to Captain Reyes. She asked endless questions about humans, about Earth, about why they had come when no one else would. Thomas answered as best he could, but one question stumped him. "Why did you help us?" Chira asked one evening as they watched the stars stream past the observation window. "We are not your species. We have nothing to offer you. Why risk so much for strangers?" Thomas thought about it for a long moment. "Because someone once helped my ancestors when they were strangers too. Long ago, my great-grandparents fled their homeland during a terrible war. They had nothing. They were nobody. But people took them in, gave them shelter, let them rebuild their lives. I exist because someone chose kindness when they could have chosen to look away." He looked down at her. "You asked why we came. The truth is, we came because you are children in need. That is enough. That has always been enough." When the convoy arrived at Harmony 3, the entire colony had gathered to greet them. The children ascended the landing ramp slowly, cautiously, unsure of what awaited them. Then, a human girl, no more than 7 years old, broke away from her parents and ran forward. She stopped in front of a young Kirith her own size and held out a stuffed toy. "For you," she said, "so you won't be scared." The Kirith child took the toy carefully, examining it with curiosity. Then it made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. Within minutes, children of both species were playing together, their differences forgotten in the universal language of joy. The integration was not always easy. There were challenges, cultural misunderstandings, medical complications, moments of grief when the children remembered all they had lost. But the humans of Harmony 3 met each challenge with patience and love. Months passed. The Kirith children began to thrive. They attended school alongside human children. They celebrated human holidays and taught their new families Kirith traditions. Some were formally adopted. Others were cared for communally in a blend of human and Kirith customs. Chira became something of a bridge between the two species. She worked with translators to preserve Kirith songs and stories. She helped younger children process their trauma. And she began to dream of a future where she could help others the way she had been helped. Word of what had happened on Harmony 3 spread throughout the galaxy. At first, other species regarded it with curiosity. Humans were still relatively new to the interstellar community, often dismissed as aggressive and territorial. This did not match the story emerging from a small colony on an unremarkable planet. Delegations came to observe. What they found surprised them. The Ashborn, as the children had come to call themselves, were flourishing. They had been given something more valuable than food or shelter. They had been given belonging. The Galactic Council formally acknowledged the humanitarian effort at Harmony 3, but it was the smaller gestures that carried the most weight. Other species began to reach out to humans, asking for partnerships on aid missions. The perception of humanity shifted, slowly but surely, from warlike newcomers to people capable of profound compassion. Years later, when Chira had grown into adulthood and become the first Kirith ambassador to serve on a human council, she was asked to give a speech about her experience. She stood before representatives of a dozen species and spoke simply. "When I was young, I thought the universe had abandoned us. I thought we would die alone and forgotten on a ruined world. Then strangers came. They did not know us. We had no value to them. But they saw children in need, and they answered." She paused, her compound eyes sweeping the assembly. "The humans have a word I have come to love. They call it hope. It is the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, even when all evidence suggests otherwise. On Ashara 7, we had lost hope. The humans gave it back to us. Not through grand gestures or mighty fleets, but through simple acts of kindness. A blanket, a meal, a story told in the dark. These things saved us. These things saved me." She looked at Captain Reyes, now retired, who sat in the audience with silver in his hair and tears in his eyes. "Across the stars, I have learned that compassion is the rarest and most precious resource in the universe. The humans carry it like a flame in their hearts, ready to share with any who need its warmth. They rekindled our faith in the galaxy and in ourselves. For that, I and all the Ashborn will be grateful until the stars themselves grow cold." The applause that followed echoed through the halls. But for Thomas Reyes, the only thing that mattered was the small hand that reached down from the podium to clasp his weathered fingers. Chira smiled down at him. "Thank you, Father." And in that moment, across the watching galaxy, faith in the possibility of kindness was rekindled once more.